Thank you so much. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Really excited to have you all here. Looks like we have a good number of folks that are joined and probably a few more still joining. Just want to thank you all again for being here. My name is Eric Cuello. I am the Director of Community Affairs for the Manhattan Borough President, Mark Levine. Here with us on the MBPO team is my deputy and the person who spearheads our leadership training series, Porfirio Figueroa. Thank you, Porfirio, for organizing this session and many others, which I'll get to in a moment. And to Dawn Billings, who's the CAU administrator. She makes sure that we're all here on Zoom and that we're able to pass this information on to you. Porfirio is actually going to handle introductions for IBO, who's going to be presenting today. But just wanted to thank again all of our community board members, even some chairs I see here who are joining us today. Um, this session is intended to be no more than an hour. We really value your time and being here for this virtual kind of brown bag series that we do. We also do have trainings in the evenings as well. So just um, giving a plug, this afternoon, we're here for IBO, but later today, we're going to have a great presentation from the Conflict of Interest Board. Tomorrow, we have a really great one about passing on institutional or archiving institutional knowledge, which with term limits looming is incredibly important and top of mind for us. We have combating implicit bias, which is an incredible session. I will highly recommend everybody be there for that one. And then we have some other ones that are going to be virtual. I won't take too much time, but I did want to flag we have one in-person session Wednesday afternoon. If you go to our website, manhattanbp.nyc.gov, you can sign up for that in-person session. It's with the state Department of Homeland Security's Emergency Readiness Division, and they will talk about how to be prepared and how to disseminate information about being prepared in case of any type of natural disaster. And I think they'll be giving out some really good go bags. So that'll be fully stocked. So that'll be really helpful. Um, okay, I will leave it there because I really want to get into this presentation. I'm really looking forward to this. So Porfirio, I'll pass it to you to do introductions.
Thank you, Eric. So appreciate it. My name is Porfirio Figueroa. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Affairs here at the Manhattan Borough President's Office. And we're so thrilled that you are here for our very first session. As Eric pointed out, there will be others. We urge you to go to the website, take a look. Today, specifically, it's IBO, primarily responsible um, to assist to enhance public understanding of the city's budget and fiscal policies and providing nonpartisan information and analysis. Um, it's a great asset in creating and understanding budget priorities. I'm going to take a moment here to introduce Hannah Leverance, and she's also here with Zin Ree. Hannah is a community engagement specialist focused on sharing IBO as a citywide resource. She's joined IBO after working as a middle school humanities teacher and then a school administrator. She also brings experience from New York State Education Department, where she supported work on proposed revisions to New York's graduation measures. Originally from Taipei, Taiwan, grew up in Westchester and moved to NYC in 2015. Hannah received her BA in psychology and Mandarin from NYU and her master's in public administration from NYU Wagner. In her free time, she loves running, reading narrative nonfiction, and spending time with her husband, friends, and dog. She's here to explain the structure of the New York City budget, key stakeholders, and the timeline of major budget decisions. We hope community members will walk away with a better understanding of how the budget impacts city services and how you can get involved in the process. And I'll let her introduce Zin. Take
Thank
it
you
away,
so
Hannah.
much for that wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Hannah. I do a lot of work in particular with our education team. The presentation today is really trying to give you kind of a high level overview of not only what our office does and how we fit into city government, but also how the city budget is structured, how we bring in revenues and expenditures. And then we'll also end with some resources specifically for community boards. There is a lot of information to get through today, so if we don't get through everything, we will be sending out slides later. But I will hand it off to Sinray to introduce herself as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm also a community engagement specialist. My name is Sinray. I've been at IBO for about a year. Prior to this, I was working in music marketing, so I come with mostly marketing background, but I've spent a lot of time going over IBO's documents and learning about the city budget. Our role is very much to bring IBO reports and bridge the gap between IBO's reporting and New York as a community. And we provide comments and feedback from New Yorkers to our team of analysts. So let's get started. Um, First, we want to introduce IBO. I know we've said a few things, but we want to hammer that home. What is IBO? The Independent Budget Office is a nonpartisan city agency that provides data-driven fiscal and policy insights into how New York City's government and services operate. At this point, I just want to highlight the nonpartisan part. People are always, how are you actually independent? Well, we are independent because we do not report to elected officials or have any party association. Our job is to provide an unbiased perspective on New York City's data to all New Yorkers. So we're not influenced by the administration. Our budget is separate, though we are funded by the city. Yeah, and we're insulated from any changes in who the mayor is. So how do we do this? Our work, firstly, we publish 3 charter mandated reports, charter mandated just being by law, New York City's law, on which are in-depth analyses of the mayor's budget plans. In these reports, we calculate our own forecasts of revenue and expenditure for the upcoming and future fiscal years, in addition to highlighting what we see as key risks to in the budget. And what are all these budget plans I'm talking about? We will cover that in this presentation. So outside of these legal mandates, we also have year-round reporting, where we publish reports on education, public safety, housing, social services. Basically, if it is New York City related, our analysts are covering it. Some examples, we are currently publishing an ongoing series of short reports that highlight how changes on the federal level could impact New Yorkers. We did a spotlight on NYCHA, a spotlight on health and hospitals, and this week we're publishing a spotlight on higher education, which you should look out for. Last week we also published a report that looked at the distribution of cooling centers in New York City. I know it's already getting chilly and we're not thinking about summer, but heat waves are a big thing in our city and we have to plan for the future. So we just published a report that looks at the distribution of cooling centers, which currently is a voluntary program, but is moving into be a actual funded program. Um, and we looked at distribution in relation to heat vulnerable populations, such as the elderly, with the intention of that being a resource for the city when they're planning where to have future cooling centers. Enough about that. Otherwise, we also deliver testimonies at city council hearings about our report findings, and we deliver presentations such as this one to spread awareness about IBO and our reports and encourage budget transparency. Another example of a resource we have is this link at the bottom, which you can get at the end of this presentation, Demystifying the School Budget, where we have a step-by-step walkthrough on how parents, community members, etc., can access and look at their own school budgets. We also do one-off or series of budget presentations tailored to specific audiences. So recently, Hannah's been doing, as Porfirio mentioned, Hannah used to be a school teacher, so she has a lot of experience with kids and has spearheaded our high school and middle school budget 101 presentations, which have been popular. So yeah, if you want us in your school, just give us a ping. All right. So, getting into the actual meat of the city budget, um, we're gonna go over some basics. Firstly, who makes decisions on the New York City budget? I see the chat is disabled. We will do
That's
Q&A at the
right, but
end.
we do have Q&A, if you want anybody to participate.
Okay. So we'll leave it. We'll be more not so much interactive, more letting you know the details. So rather than answering my question, I'll just answer it myself. Who makes the decisions? The mayor. Um, so the mayor is the primary budget preparer. They're the one who drafts and proposes these plans to city council. So they're the ones who really set the priorities for each fiscal year, and they hold a lot of power in how the budget is shaped. The mayor's office of management and budget is then the entity that distributes and administers those funds. Other important budget actors apart from the mayor include city council. So as I mentioned, the mayor will create and prepare and propose their budget plan. And that is then handed over to city council, who analyze it, review it, and negotiate priorities for their own districts. They hold public hearings to understand the financial plan from different perspectives. These are also times where the Independent Budget Office will testify at these public hearings and go in depth into what exactly is going on in the budget. Yeah, and then other than that, we have the comptroller who audits the actual spending. They compile a annual comprehensive financial report, or the ACFR, which is something we look at as well. And that's like a much more detailed breakdown on actual spending throughout the year. And then we have the Financial Control Board, which is an oversight committee of how the city's finances are managed. And these folks are more like who you're more likely to interact with as a community board member, and the comptroller and the financial control board are not so much people you would be in touch with. Um, okay. So what are our Okay, so now I'm going to go into the timeline of the budget process. When does all of this take place? When is the mayor actually proposing, and when is city council taking in feedback from their community? So as you can see from this timeline, where this confetti guy is, the New York City fiscal year does not go according to the calendar year. It begins on July 1st and runs through till June 30th. Um, so before the beginning of the fiscal year, we need to have an adopted budget. This being the budget plan that has been negotiated and approved by City Council, and passed through City Council. Let's see. And then this adopted budget is what serves as the city's like North Star for our finances in the coming fiscal year. So prior to this adopted budget, which is what we're always referring to, we have to have some drafts. So the first one is the preliminary budget in January, which is the first time it brings the following fiscal year's information into balance. So what we're spending and how much we're taking in as a city need to be equal. And the January preliminary budget plan is the first sort of draft of the adopted budget where that happens. And then after the enacted state budget is published, technically it should happen around May, but it is often late. Um, the executive budget comes out, which is a update from the preliminary budget. And then between the executive budget and the adopted budget is the period of time where a lot of public hearings happen, a lot of negotiation between city council and the mayor's office. Um, yeah, and that's the version that people refer to when ahead of the adopted budget for negotiations. And this White Star is where we're at now. So we're a few months into fiscal year 2026. It is 2020 calendar year 2025, but we're in the fiscal future, planning ahead. And we are looking out for the first quarter plan, which is the first sort of status update on how spending and revenue, which is the money we take in, has been going for fiscal year 2026. Yeah, so that's the timeline. These green stars are where IBO produce their own independent analyses. And the blue stars is where community board members are. So right now, you have probably been voting on your annual needs statement priorities in your community board meetings and holding public hearings to understand what are your district's priorities. I know that every district has a different process, and collecting a wide and diverse range of opinions from your entire district is very difficult. But this is the time when that happens, and your needs statement will be due October 31st. For those of you who are not yet familiar, though it might have been your first time going through the needs statement process, this is the primary way that the general public can get involved in the budget process and make their district's priorities heard and reflected in the budget in the future. Yeah, so that's the timeline. I guess at that point, if you have any questions, you can put that in the Q&A function. But otherwise you can save it for later. So now at this point, I'm gonna pass it on to my colleague Hannah, who's gonna go into the nuts and bolts of the budget.
Hi, everyone. So like Sunray said, now we are going to talk about kind of the meat of IBO's work, which is looking at revenues, which is what the city is bringing in throughout or for the next fiscal year, as well as expenditures. So what are kind of the programs and services that the city is spending money on, and what are kind of the relationships between both of those pieces. So, in terms of the importance of New York City's budget, creating the city's budget is a process, obviously, in which a lot of the city's policies decisions are shaped, and they're also a blueprint for talking about revenues. So, we'll be able to see how much money the city is receiving for the fiscal year based on some factors that we're going to share in the next couple of slides, as well as expenditures. So, we're going to talk through how the city government will spend money on services and infrastructure and kind of the balance of competing priorities that the different actors within the city budget process have to think about when they are creating financial plans for the next several years. So one of the things that we always like to bring attention to when it comes to looking at financial plans is that the New York City's budget is actually required to be balanced. So we'll talk about why it's required to be balanced, because historically this was not always a fiscal requirement. But as you can see in this slide, that basically just means that the revenues or the amount of money that the city is bringing in has to equal the amount that the city is spending as well for the next fiscal year. So unlike the federal government, which can take out debt, New York City is emboldened to this general accounting practice where it not only has to balance revenues and expenditures, but it also has to plan for the out years, so the next 4 years of the fiscal cycle as well. So let's talk about some of the reasons. Like I said, New York City did not always have to follow general accounting practices, but as a result of the New York City fiscal crisis in the 1970s, the state actually took control of the city budget process for a while. And some of the causes of the New York City fiscal crisis are really broad, but some of the ones that we've talked about are poor financial management. So the city was taking on extreme amounts of debt in order to pay its bills. There was also a shrinking tax base. So people were leaving the city to move to other parts of the country as well as the suburbs. There was a nationwide recession, and there was also tensions with the federal government. So if you look at the newspaper headline here, the president at the time, who was President Ford, was not really not politically in a position to want to bail out the city. And there was a lot of tensions between the federal government and the city at this time, where the federal government was not supporting kind of the financial bailout of New York City. And so while Ford did not say exactly drop dead to New York City, that was kind of the attitude towards financial bailouts at the time. As a result, though, of the 1970s fiscal crisis, there were a lot of state mandated reforms. The first being the creation of the Financial Control Board, which Sinray mentioned in the last couple slides. This is a state entity that will kind of just do a general oversight of New York City's budget. They're not really as important now because New York City is not in a financial crisis, but they will reconvene if New York City does get to that point. Out of the 1970s, we also saw the requirement for balanced budgets. So that just means, as you saw on the last slide, that revenues must equal expenditures. And then we're also now required to do a multi-year forecasting of revenues and expenditures for the out years. So let's just quickly talk through the largest portions of revenues. Again, at IBO, a lot of our work is thinking about forecasting for the next couple years. A lot of this forecasting takes into account a lot of different factors, such as demographic shifts, looking at what our revenues were from past years, looking at economic conditions. But the four primary sources for our New York City budget is number one, local taxes. So New York City actually gets the largest portion of its revenues from local property taxes. That makes up around 44% of all of New York City's revenues. So it's a very important revenue source for us. We also get some money from the state, some money from the federal government, and then other kind of revenues from things like fines, from fees, and from interest payments. So just to give you some quick examples of state aid, one significant source of state aid for us is something called foundation aid. This is the money that New York State delivers to school districts all across New York State. And New York City DOE gets a pretty significant chunk of its funding from state sources. The state also provides funds for childcare vouchers through state programs. And then when we're talking about federal aid, that includes funds for SNAP programs, so food benefits, Medicaid, which the federal government has a matching program for, and then infrastructure grants. So an agency like the Department of Transportation or other agencies that are running capital programs are going to rely more heavily on federal aid when it comes to this type of infrastructure grant. So just talking through property taxes really quickly, because it is such a large source of New York City's revenue. We kind of wanted to highlight a past example of IBO's work, but then also just show you why it's sometimes so hard to forecast revenue. So one of the examples that we wanted to highlight was the impact that COVID had on revenues. So obviously during COVID, a lot of people were leaving the city, people were working from home and not going into the office. And as a result, in 21 to 22, the Department of Finance, which is the city department that collects property taxes as well as assesses property values around the city, really cut down on the property value assessments for commercial and residential buildings. So if you could see in this graph, you'll see IBO had forecasted around 36 billion coming in from property taxes. The Office of Management and Budget had forecasted around 34. So a little different numbers, but kind of similar in scope. But you can see here that in 2022, as a result of that declining property value, the amount that we collected was actually closer to $29-30 billion. So a pretty significant change. But this is just one example of kind of the different things that we have to think about, not only in our office, but as a whole, when we're thinking about money that the city brings in through revenues. All right, so I'm going to actually turn on the chat really quickly for this one because we kind of have an interactive activity for you to think about. But here, we just want to highlight another example of revenue forecasting. And here we wanted to highlight legal cannabis revenue. So as you might have heard in 2021, City Council was really excited about a new state act called the For Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. It had anticipated that by 2023, this would be a pretty significant source of tax revenue, and we would have opened around 100 dispensaries by then, when in reality, by mid-2023, you see that only 9 legal cannabis dispensaries had opened in New York City, and it really fell short of kind of the anticipated goals in terms of collecting tax revenues. So I just turned on the chat really quickly, and I want you to drop maybe like 1 or 2 reasons why you think this act might not have been very successful initially in collecting revenue, and there was such a lag in implementation. So I'm going to give everyone a minute and we'll just talk through the kind of ideas that IBO had on why there was such a lag in implementing this particular act.
Or rollout. We love to see it. Yes. Yeah. So the question is, what were some barriers to opening legal cannabis dispensaries in New York? We have Monique said poor rollout. Um, Richard said community resistance. Jennifer also said community hesitation to host sites. Delays in licensing. The state was not clear on guidelines from Reshma. Sean, unclear language in the law. Limited application approvals. Process is too expensive, says Francis. Yeah.
I think these are all perfect. I'm going to now turn off the chat and we'll have another interactive activity in a bit, but these are all perfect. So the kind of four main barriers that IBO identified all are really in line with what you are referencing. So number one, there was delays in licensing because this was a state incentive. There was obviously a lot of bureaucratic hurdles with the city giving out licenses. There was also lack of startup capital. So this is a pretty expensive business to go into. And so that process obviously was prohibitive to people. There were also legal battles. So New York State wanted to prioritize people that had been justice involved in getting licenses first, and there was legal battles over this. Lastly, it's a lot easier to just kind of walk to your bodega and buy marijuana and sometimes cheaper. And so those unlicensed shops really diverted sales that could have been taxed by the city. So this is just a kind of an activity to show you kind of the difficulties of forecasting revenue. But in our study, we also pointed out that, City Council had envisioned a really big revenue source from this, but as of fiscal year 2024, only 2.4 million had been collected throughout the whole city. Nice. All right, so we are now going to talk about kind of the opposite side of revenues. So we're going to quickly touch on foregone revenue. Foregone revenue is when the city kind of gives tax breaks or tax incentives in order to stimulate economic growth in certain areas. So the example that we're highlighting for this slide is Madison Square Garden. Not sure if many of you live in this area in Midtown, but Madison Square Garden obviously houses a lot of economic activity. It is home to a lot of sports games and other kind of large events that bring in revenue for the city. But New York City also kind of is foregoing property taxes and giving this stadium particular tax breaks in order to stimulate the economic growth. And so one of the things that we do at our office is also to price out kind of the value of tax expenditures. And so in 2023, we looked at MSG in particular, and we evaluated that it was worth around $867 million, which would have brought in an estimated tax value of 42 million. But because of the deal that they have with the city, this is considered also a form of tax expenditure because it is not direct spending for the city, but it does also reduce the city's revenue capacity. So kind of just some interesting things to think about too when thinking about forecasting tax revenues as well as expenses for the city. So now we're going to talk through the two types of budgets. The budget that we've mostly been referencing in this presentation, and probably the one that you're most familiar with, is the expense budget or the operating budget. So the operating budget is a shorter term budget. It is the budget that Sinray talked about in that timeline, and it lasts for 1 year at a time and covers day-to-day expenses. So things like teacher salaries, things like supplies for schools, things like day-to-day services or paying electric bills. And it is a binding commitment to a level of appropriations for a particular fiscal year. The next type of budget that we'll also get into towards the end of this presentation is the capital project, the capital budget. The capital budget is a longer term budget because it is thinking kind of more towards funding longer term projects. And so the really basic definition of a project that falls into the capital budget is a project that has a cost of over $50,000. So it has to be pretty expensive. And then the projects that fall into this category also have to have a minimum useful lifespan of 5 years. So something like renovating a library bathroom or adding a new swing set to a playground is something that would fall under the capital budget. But then it can also be kind of infrastructure like a new IT system or new computers for schools. Other things that are used day to day, but have a longer lifespan than things that fall into the operating budget. All right, I'm going to just quickly talk through the expense budget and break down some of the categories here. So if we go to the next slide, this pie chart is just going to show you the total expense budget. So for fiscal year 2026, which we are currently in, the total expense budget for the city, again, running all those day-to-day expenses, it was around $116 billion. So a really large budget and could be very overwhelming, but let's just quickly talk about kind of the different subsections of that budget. So number one, in the blue, you'll see education. Education is the category of spending that New York City spends the most on. This is spending on mostly the Department of Education as well as the programs that it runs, but paying for things like teacher salaries, paying for pupil transportation, a lot of the other kind of expenses that go along with education, including special education spending, school lunches, charter schools, all fall within education. Next, we have housing and health and social services. So this is funding for the public hospitals of New York City, other social services that the city has, including the Department of Homeless Services, will fall under this category. Next, we have pensions, fringe, and claims, which is a wide category that kind of pays for the different benefits for New York City employees. And then in the yellow, you'll see public safety and judicial funds. So this is funding for the NYPD, the FDNY, and then also some Department of Correction Services in here as well. So what counts as an expenditure? I think I've kind of talked through this already, so I don't want to be too repetitive. But again, it's kind of broken down into two categories. So salaries and benefits are kind of the largest portion of this, as well as operation and maintenance. So keeping services running, fixing things that are broken, and then sometimes contracting to outside services such as nonprofits to pay for city services. Lastly, we also just wanted to point out debt service because that is a category that we get asked a lot about. People are confused why the city has debt because, again, we are supposed to be balancing the budget. And debt service exists because when the city does have capital projects, such as construction projects, building roads, modifying bridges, etc., the city will borrow money in the form of bonds. And so debt service is the category that you see that the city is repaying the money that it's borrowed in order to pay for those longer term capital projects. Okay, so I'm going to turn the chat on again for this slide as well. But here we're going to talk about legal mandates. So legal mandates are requirements that New York City has that oftentimes drive up spending for the city. So some examples of legal requirements that the city has to follow, and these are often set by the federal government or the state government, are special education. So the DOE is mandated to pay for special education services for all students in New York City, whether or not they attend public school. So that's an example of a legal requirement. We also have right to shelter. So right to shelter is another mandate that the city has to follow, where it has to legally house any homeless individuals or families that qualify for the right to shelter program. And so these things are obviously really expensive and drive up kind of the spending that New York City has. But in particular, we're going to pull out the New York City class size cap law, which is a 2022 mandate passed by the New York State government. And we're just going to give you an example of kind of the spending that the city needs to think about when complying to legal requirements. So maybe just drop in the chat really quickly if you've heard about the New York City class size law. It is something that is being rolled out by the DOE, and it is set to sorry, I just turned the chat on, but just drop in the chat if you've heard about the class size mandate. Maybe if you're a parent or a teacher or somebody just involved in the education space. Cool. So Ben is saying yes, he's heard about it. Yeah, most of you guys are probably very familiar with this class size law. So just to give people who have not heard about it a little bit of context, the New York City class size mandate is a New York State mandate, and it is mandating that New York City reduce class sizes over time. So by 2028, New York City class sizes have to reduce to a certain amount of students. For high school classrooms, I believe it's around 28 students or maybe 26. Maybe someone can correct me in the chat if that's wrong. But basically, New York City will have to spend money in order to cooperate with this mandate, which is just going to be reducing the number of students in general education classrooms throughout New York City public schools. So one of the reasons IBO is looking at this mandate in particular is because it's really going to factor into our forecasting about expenditures for the next several years. And I would like people now to drop in the chat and just think about kind of what the DOE is going to have to spend money on in order to reduce class sizes. So maybe just drop in one or two things that the Department of Education, which is in charge of running schools, is going to have to spend more on. Perfect. So Ben said more staff, teacher salaries and benefits. Okay, I'm going to leave it open for like 15 more seconds if anyone has any other ideas. All right, I'm turning it off now, but all these answers were correct. So IBO in particular was looking at kind of the cost of these different factors. And if you can go to the next bullet point. The most important thing is that the DOE is going to hire additional teachers. So in 2023, when we were costing out the price of compliance, we kind of surmised that the DOE would have to hire around 17,700 additional teachers. And this is something that's going to cost the DOE a significant amount of money. So around $1.9 billion. That's one piece. Like you guys said in the chat, there are other pieces that the DOE has to think about. So they might have to construct new classrooms. They might have to reallocate schools. They also have funding pressures with changes at the federal level, and then also trade-offs with other priorities that the DOE has to think about, such as safety, housing, and social services. So this is just kind of another example of the larger things that the city has to think about when planning out its expenses, is being able to fulfill these legal mandates that are often very expensive. All right, Sinray is now going to take you through finding budget documents.
Yes. So, now we've given sort of an overview of what you can expect to find in budget documents. Now we're gonna actually look for them. So you can look for the expense revenues and expenditures, and the capital budget. It's all available online. If you go to OMB's website and navigate to their publications tab, There's a left-hand sidebar where it has the fiscal year the publications divided by fiscal year. But we're gonna be looking. Oh, and also, they have a document on budget publication descriptions if you're ever confused about any terms on the website. But if we go to OMB's website and we want to see the most recent numbers, these would be June 2025's adopted budget, which was published in June 2025, but is for fiscal year 2026. So if you click on this particular financial plan, oh, you'll get this page. And wow, so many links. Didn't we just say there are two types of important budgets? That is correct. There's the expense revenue contract budget or the operating budget, which is we were talking about the $116 billion. And there's the capital budget. All these other links, community board geographic report, financial plans, revenue financial plan detail, these are all supplemental documents that give more detail to various parts of the budget or help um, with more exposition on what is behind the numbers in the budget. For example, the financial plan expense gives you the out years. Out years refers to just the future fiscal years. And the financial plan reconciliation shows you the difference in the budget numbers from this plan to the previous plan. So it tells you what has changed. Yeah, okay. So now let's actually look at the budget document itself. If you click on this expense revenue contract budget, you will be faced with hundreds and hundreds of pages of this. It's really ugly looking, but it's not that crazy once you start looking at once you understand certain terms. So if you're looking at this, where do my eyes go first? We want to see what agency this page is talking about. So for here, we're looking at the mayoralties expense budget summary. And then all this is the agency description. And then another key term we need you to know is units of appropriation. So the unit of appropriation is approved in budget resolutions voted on by City Council. And it is the most granular level of funding that is approved in the budget. Each unit of appropriation is meant to be an amount requested for personal service or other than personal service for a particular program, purpose, activity, or institution. So it's essentially the chunk of money that is assigned to this specific purpose. So the other key term that I already mentioned are PS and OTPS, which is a very common acronym you'll hear when referring to the budget. That being personal service, other than personal service, which we like to say at IBO is staff and stuff. So you got your staff is your PS and your stuff is your OTPS, which refers to spending on everything outside staff, which is like rent, supplies, and equipment. Um, okay, we need to be cognizant of time. So, okay, so we're referring back at this point, looking at this document, I'm gonna open the chat up a little bit and ask you guys, looking at this page, what are we looking at? Can someone type out in the chat, what is this laying out for us? All right, we don't have any hits at the moment, but that's fine. I'll go ahead and let you know. You want to look at the top. At the top, we're looking at Manhattan Community Board number 1. Okay, someone said cost for category by budget modification. So actually, we're looking at the same document as just now. It's the expense budget summary, but specifically for Manhattan Community Board number 1. And from this document, I can ask you guys, how much is Manhattan CB1 getting for personal services? That is, how much are they spending on staff? Does anybody, for fiscal year 2026, does anybody want to venture a guess? The question is, in this document, can you tell me how much is budgeted for staff? And we have 275, 267. Okay. Thank you for your answers, guys. The correct answer, you want to look here, personal services, adopted budget 2026. It's 275,000. So folks who thought it was 267, that's the adopted budget for FY 2025, very sneaky. And you can see the full-time budgeted positions is 3, and this is the number. So all that's to say is that once you understand specific terms in these budget documents, it's not as spooky, even though it is really ugly looking. Okay. So now we understand what a unit of appropriation is. I just kind of want to break it down further. Still using the Manhattan Community Board as an example. So their total budget was $302,000. And within that, they have 2 units of appropriation, personal services and other than personal services, as we talked about. That is not always the case with every agency. Some agencies have many more units of appropriation for specific purposes. And then sometimes they remain not as granular. So when it comes to community boards, you have OTPS and PS, and further in that, they have object class, which refers to like a group of units of appropriation that a group of OTPS supplies that they're paying for. And then within that, it gets a little more granular. And they gave a number for food and forage supplies. What does that mean? I don't know. Manhattan CB1, what are you foraging for? If anyone has a thought. But that's just to show you like where the UA sits within the agency, which in this case is nice, nuts and berries. Which in this case we're using Community Board 1. And it can get more granular. So Manhattan Community Board 1 is actually a good example of an object code. Not all agencies provide object codes. And that's kind of a contentious subject. But we're gonna move on. Okay, so capital budget. We were just talking all about the expense budget. Now moving on to the capital budget, just to reiterate, what is a capital project? We said there are 2 main features. Does anyone want to remind us what those are? I'm just going to go ahead because we're running out of time. First, it needs to be expensive, which is it needs to cost at least $50,000. Exactly. And it needs to last a long time. So that's what qualifies something to be a capital project. It's expensive and it lasts a long time, which is 5 years for infrastructural projects and 3 for IT projects. So at this point, okay, and where are these capital funds for this year going? As you can see, a lot for DOE, followed by housing and environmental protection. So I just wanted to test everyone's understanding at this point. Can everyone type in the channel some examples of capital projects? So what would be considered a capital project? As a reminder, we said they have to be expensive and they have to last at least 5 years, or for IT projects, 3 years. So does anyone have any thoughts on what capital project could be? Gateway Tunnel, providing water in one of our parks. That is actually an interesting example because that would go into the expense budget. Gateway Tunnel, but constructing a new infrastructure, yes. New school, yes. Park reconstruction, correct. HVAC system repair for libraries, yes. Capital. MTA, some MTA expense, some MTA is capital. Cool. So a lot of new construction stuff. Any examples of an expenditure project? As someone mentioned just now, providing water in one of our parks. So that doesn't exactly, I mean, it's hard to quantify, but I guess we can say that it doesn't really last for 5 years. It's not something that's gonna exist there and remain for five. Like the water is kind of running through. So that goes under expenditure. Um, Planning study, water source in the park. I mean, if you're constructing like maybe a bunch of new water faucets, that would be capital. Okay, scope meetings, engineering products, reports, correct. Okay, so basically the expenditure projects are anything that has to do with the programs or services, your staff, your rent, your stuff, that translation services, correct. Um, yeah, so someone said planning study again. Um, these are things that don't last for 5 years or cost more than $50,000. Um, here's a question for you. Um, what would we consider new school computers? So for example, I am purchasing like 50 MacBooks, uh desktops. Um, and would this be capital or expense? Capital. Okay, I'm getting two capitals, one expense. And yes, we're only at 5 minutes, my bad. So the answer is it's actually capital because it fulfills the requirements of lasting more than 5 years and costing over $50,000. Exactly, Wayne. So if it costs more than 50K, it can go under capital. Um, However, there can be discussion around whether or not that's something that makes sense. Does it make sense to go under capital projects? Is this something we should be borrowing money for? Um, an ongoing discussion. But as we're running out of time, I'm just gonna move forward. We're gonna go through this really quick. Essentially, this section where you'll get our when you get the slides, you can click through. We provided some links for various resources you can refer to. So with your annual district need statements, things that you might want to refer to when crafting them, and some sources of funding. Council member discretionary funds, you can track the changes of various requests, and open data, big source of excellent data. Yeah, sorry, we have 4 minutes left, so I kind of just skip through that. You can read that on your own, and I think we'll open it up for questions now.
Thank you so much. There are two questions actually that are in the Q&A, if I may bring them to your attention. So, um, Nye Whitaker says it would be great to have the community boards receive a report on the city's investment in their communities each year with a presentation post budgeting process. How can we make that happen so there is transparency with local residents as to how their taxpayer dollars are being invested?
Yeah, I think for this question, we do offer community boards the opportunity to invite us to presentations whenever they want, basically. The difficult thing is we're a pretty small agency, so we only have around 45 analysts, and all of our analysts work on different teams. So it would be difficult to do a citywide budget look at your specific community, but I would say if you're interested in a specific agency, such as the Department of Education or the Department of Transportation, we can create but like a presentation about the agency and the specific projects it has in your area for you. But doing a citywide look at how the budget is distributed in your community would be difficult just because of our capacity as an agency. And yeah, we
Okay.
will be sharing the deck afterwards as well.
All right. There's one more question. So, what is the level of budget control, i.e., total entity appropriation, personal resources, services?
So maybe if you could clarify what do you mean by the level of budget control? But just to give you like a sense of the unit of appropriation that we discussed before, the person that has or the entity that has control over amounts in that budget for units of appropriation would be city council. So they are the entity that controls how much money goes into each unit of appropriation bucket. And so that's kind of how they perform oversight for different city agencies. One city agencies have the money from city council, though. They kind of have kind of freer reign to do what they want with those budget resources as long as they're spending within, of appropriation. But we're happy to follow up too and look through different parts of the budget that you might be interested in specifically as well.
Yeah.
Which is a perfect segue. Hannah, Zinray, thank you so much for presenting today and being here. We thank all of you who have participated and taken the last hour to be here with us. If you do have further questions, you could send them to our office and we can pass them on to IBO. And with that said, yes, the presentation will be shared with all your district managers so that you could actually have them and see it if you want to follow up as well. Again, on behalf of the Manhattan Borough President's Office, my director, Eric Cuello, which I hope he's still here so he can say goodbye. Dawn,
So here.
we thank you so much. And I'll turn it over to you, Eric, if you want to have a
Great.
last word.
Just finally want to say thank you again to our presenters, Hannah and Sinri. And I just want to encourage everyone again. This is just the first of 9 sessions that we have going on this week. So please make sure to sign up for any more that you may be interested in. Thanks, and hope to see you at 6 o'clock for our next one, which is conflict of interest. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.